A storm on the horizon. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the small town of Ashton in a wash of amber light. Angela Carter's car rumbled over the uneven asphalt as she approached the familiar yet alien landscape of her childhood home. It had been over a decade since she left Ashton, and the thought of returning to this place still sent a shiver down her spine. But Angela wasn't the same person who had fled this town so many years ago. She was older, wiser, and determined to confront the ghosts of her past. Angela had spent her years away in larger cities, building her career in law enforcement. Starting as a patrol officer, she quickly rose through the ranks, her sharp intellect and unwavering integrity earning her accolades and respect. Her work often brought her face to face with injustice, but Angela had learned to stand tall, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She had become a symbol of fairness and strength, traits that set her apart in a world still grappling with its biases. As she pulled into Ashton's modest town square, memories of her childhood came flooding back. The diner where her father had taken her for ice cream after her first spelling bee. The school where she was the only black girl in her class, her accomplishments often overlooked. The church where her mother had organized community health clinics, only to face veiled hostility from those who didn't want to see her family succeed. Every corner of Ashton was painted with memories, some sweet, most bitter. Angela parked in front of the precinct, the engine's rumble fading into the evening quiet. The building was as she remembered it, a drab, boxy structure that seemed to sag under the weight of time. But tonight, it wasn't just another precinct to her, it was her precinct. She adjusted her blazer, her polished badge catching the dim streetlights. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the entrance. Her appointment as Ashton's new police chief had been a shock to many, especially in a town where progress often felt like a distant dream. But Angela hadn't come here to fit into anyone's expectations. She was here to lead, to challenge the status quo, and to make Ashton a place where justice wasn't just a word but a reality. Inside, the precinct buzzed with the hum of voices, the clang of filing cabinets, and the distant chatter of a police radio. Angela's entrance drew a few curious glances, but most officers seemed too preoccupied to notice her. That was until she reached the front desk, where a young officer stood, nervously tapping at a keyboard. He glanced up, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but hesitant. "I'm Chief Carter," Angela replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here to meet the team." The officer blinked, his face a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "Oh, of course. Welcome. Let me get someone for you." Angela nodded, watching as he scurried off. She could feel the weight of other eyes on her now, whispers starting to ripple through the room. She held her ground, her expression unreadable, her years of experience teaching her not to react to the stares. Her patience was soon interrupted by a sharp, derisive voice behind her. Well, what do we have here?" Angela turned slowly to face the speaker, her gaze landing on a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face carved by years of scorn and arrogance. His uniform was slightly unkempt, his badge glinting against the dull fabric of his shirt. Cigarette smoke curled from his hand, the ember glowing like a tiny warning light. "Who are you supposed to be?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. "We don't get many visitors this late." Angela took a measured step forward, her gaze steady. "I'm Chief Angela Carter." "And you are?" The man's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Officer Michael Harper," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "Didn't know they were handing out chief badges to just anyone these days." Angela's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "I'm here to lead this department, Officer Harper. I suggest we start off on the right foot." Michael's laugh was low and dismissive, a sound that echoed in the small room. "Right foot, huh? I've been here 20 years, Chief. I know how things work around here. You might want to take some notes before you start handing out orders." Angela's eyes didn't waver. I appreciate your experience, Officer Harper. I'm sure it'll be invaluable as we move forward. But let me make one thing clear. This department will operate under my leadership. I expect professionalism and respect from every officer under my command." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Michael's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of something Angela couldn't quite place: resentment, perhaps, or maybe fear. He took a drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing brighter as he exhaled a stream of smoke. "We'll see about that," he muttered, brushing past her as he walked toward the back of the precinct. Angela watched him go, her face betraying no emotion. She knew men like Michael Harper all too well, men who thrived on intimidation and control, who viewed authority as their birthright. But Angela had faced worse, and she wasn't about to let him or anyone else derail her mission. As she turned back to the front desk, the young officer returned, an apologetic look on his face. "Chief Carter, the team is ready to meet you in the briefing room," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Thank you," Angela replied, her tone softening as she followed him down the hallway. The meeting room was filled with curious faces as Angela entered. She could feel their questions hanging in the air, unspoken but palpable. Taking her place at the front of the room, she addressed them with a calm yet commanding presence. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Chief Angela Carter," she began, her voice steady. "I know my appointment might come as a surprise to some of you, but I want to make one thing clear. I'm here to work with you, to build a department we can all be proud of. My door is always open, and I'm committed to creating an environment of respect, accountability, and fairness. Together, we can make Ashton a better place for everyone." As she spoke, Angela noticed a few nods of approval among the officers, but she also caught the narrowed eyes and tight-lipped expressions of others, their skepticism evident. She wasn't here to win everyone over in a single night, though. Change would take time, and Angela was ready for the challenge. But as the meeting concluded and the officers filed out, she couldn't shake the lingering tension in the air. Michael Harper's presence loomed large, his disdain a stark reminder of the battles that lay ahead. Angela knew this wasn't just about earning the respect of her team. It was about dismantling the deeply rooted prejudices that had shaped this town for generations. And she was ready. The storm was coming, but Angela Carter had weathered worse. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. A line in the sand. The next morning, Angela Carter arrived at the precinct just as the sun cast its golden rays across Ashton. The sleepy town was beginning to stir, and the air carried the mingling scents of dew-soaked grass and brewing coffee from the diner down the street. Angela had barely slept, her thoughts occupied with the meeting from the night before and the simmering hostility she had sensed, particularly from Officer Harper. But if her years in law enforcement had taught her anything, it was how to confront challenges head-on. As Angela stepped into the precinct, the hum of activity was already building. Officers moved about, some reviewing case files, others chatting over steaming mugs of coffee. Angela's presence drew glances, though most quickly averted their eyes when she met their gaze. She noted the divide. Some faces displayed cautious curiosity, while others bore a thinly veiled skepticism. It was nothing she hadn't faced before. Angela headed straight for her office, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. The space was modest, with a sturdy wooden desk, a few chairs, and a window that overlooked the quiet street outside. A stack of reports sat on the desk, but Angela's focus was elsewhere. She had planned a morning briefing with the entire team, her first official step toward establishing her authority and setting the tone for her leadership. She was reviewing her notes when a sharp knock sounded at the door. Before she could respond, the door creaked open and a young officer stepped in. It was the same officer from the previous night, the one who had shown her to the briefing room. "Chief Carter," he said, his tone respectful but hesitant. "I thought you should know. Officer Harper's been vocal this morning." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Vocal?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "He's been making comments. About you. Loudly. Angela's expression didn't change, but inwardly, she felt a flicker of annoyance. Harper's defiance was no surprise, but the blatant disrespect so early in her tenure was a challenge she couldn't ignore. She set her pen down and stood. "Thank you for letting me know," she said. "I'll handle it." The officer nodded, relief flickering across his face, and stepped aside as Angela exited her office. The murmurs of conversation in the bullpen grew quieter as she entered, her presence commanding attention. She scanned the room and quickly spotted Harper, leaning casually against a desk, a coffee cup in one hand and a cigarette in the other. His laughter was loud and grating, and Angela didn't need to hear the words to know he was the center of the commotion. Without hesitation, she walked over, her steps purposeful. The officers around Harper stiffened and shifted uncomfortably as she approached, their gazes darting between her and Harper like spectators anticipating a clash. "Officer Harper," Angela said, her tone crisp. "A word." Harper turned, his smirk widening when he saw her. "Chief," he drawled, dragging the word out. "What can I do for you?" Angela didn't rise to the bait. "My office." "Now." For a moment, Harper hesitated, his smirk faltering as the room fell silent. The weight of her authority was undeniable, and despite his bravado, he couldn't ignore it. With a shrug, he set his coffee down and stubbed out his cigarette in a nearby ashtray. "Lead the way," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Angela didn't respond, instead turning and walking back to her office. Harper followed, his steps slow and deliberate, as though he were trying to assert some measure of control over the situation. Once inside, Angela closed the door behind him and took her seat behind the desk. Harper leaned casually against the wall, his arms crossed. "What's this about, Chief?" he asked, feigning innocence. Angela met his gaze, her eyes steady. "It's about your behavior, Officer Harper. The comments, the disrespect. It stops now." Harper snorted, shaking his head. "Disrespect? Come on, I'm just speaking my mind." "You're undermining your superior," Angela said, her voice firm. "And that's not acceptable. Not in this department." Harper pushed off the wall, his smirk returning. "You think you can walk in here and change how things work? You're an outsider. You don't understand this town, these people." Angela's gaze didn't waver. "I grew up in this town. I know it better than you think. And I know that change is long overdue." Harper's expression darkened. "Change? You think you're some kind of savior? You don't belong here, Carter. You're just passing through, like all the others who thought they could fix what doesn't need fixing." Angela leaned forward, her hands resting on the desk. "I'm not here to pass through, Harper. I'm here to lead. To make this department a place where every officer and every citizen is treated with respect and fairness. If you can't be part of that, you're welcome to find a position elsewhere." The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken challenges. For a moment, Harper seemed to consider her words, his jaw tightening. Then he gave a short, bitter laugh. "We'll see how long you last," he said, turning and walking out of the office without waiting for a dismissal. Angela watched him go, her expression unreadable. She knew this was just the beginning. Harper wasn't the kind of man to back down easily, and his defiance would likely escalate before it subsided. But Angela wasn't deterred. She had faced men like him before, and she had no intention of letting him or anyone else derail her mission. As the door clicked shut behind him, Angela took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. The battle lines were drawn, and she was ready to fight, not just for her authority, but for the future of the department and the town she once called home. A test of willpower. The following days unfolded like a quiet storm, each moment charged with tension beneath a veneer of routine. Angela Carter threw herself into her role with precision and determination, meeting with officers, reviewing cases, and establishing her expectations for the precinct. She was methodical, her leadership style grounded in transparency and collaboration. But despite her best efforts to build bridges, one name remained a thorn in her side: Officer Michael Harper. Harper made no attempt to hide his disdain. In meetings, he crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing with every directive Angela gave. In the hallways, his sarcastic remarks carried just enough subtlety to avoid outright insubordination. And in the field, his actions skirted the edges of protocol, daring Angela to confront him. He was testing her resolve, and Angela knew it. One particularly tense morning, Angela was reviewing the case involving a series of thefts at local businesses. The reports were scattered, inconsistent, and riddled with gaps. Frustrated, she called for an impromptu meeting with the officers assigned to the case. Harper was among them. The conference room was stifling, the hum of the overhead lights adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Angela stood at the head of the table, her posture commanding yet approachable. The officers filed in, Harper arriving last and slouching into a chair at the far end of the table. "Thank you all for coming," Angela began, her tone calm but firm. "I've reviewed the reports on the recent thefts, and there are significant issues we need to address. The lack of consistency in these reports makes it difficult to identify patterns or suspects. Moving forward, I expect thorough documentation from everyone involved." Harper leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "With all due respect, Chief," he said, his voice tinged with sarcasm, "some of us have been handling cases like this for years. Maybe the reports aren't the problem." The room fell silent, all eyes shifting between Harper and Angela. The tension was palpable, the air charged with anticipation. Angela met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "Experience is valuable, Officer Harper, but it doesn't excuse sloppiness. If there are issues with the reports, it's our responsibility to address them. Our job is to serve this community to the best of our ability, and that starts with accountability." Harper smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Accountability? Huh. Funny, coming from someone who just got here." Angela took a step closer to the table, her voice steady but laced with steel. "This isn't about me, Harper. It's about the people we serve. If you have concerns about my leadership, I'm happy to address them in my office. But I won't tolerate disrespect in this room or anywhere else." Harper's smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Angela didn't press the moment further, instead turning her attention to the rest of the team. "Let's refocus," she said, her tone softening. "The community is counting on us. I need everyone to be at their best. Let's start by revisiting the crime scene reports. Officer Ruiz, you'll take point on consolidating the data. Officer Martinez, you'll coordinate with local business owners to gather additional statements." The meeting continued without further interruptions, though the tension lingered. Harper remained quiet, his expression unreadable, but Angela knew the confrontation wasn't over. Later that afternoon, Angela decided to take a more hands-on approach. She donned her jacket and headed out into the field, determined to see the crime scenes for herself. She visited the small businesses that had been targeted, speaking with owners and employees, piecing together a clearer picture of the thefts. Her presence didn't go unnoticed. The locals were surprised to see the new chief out in the community, her approachable demeanor earning their trust and cooperation. At a small bakery on the edge of town, Angela struck up a conversation with the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Jacobs. He described the night of the break-in with vivid detail, his hands trembling as he recounted the loss. "They didn't just take money," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "They took my wife's locket. She passed last year, and that was all I had left of her." Angela's chest tightened, the weight of his words pressing against her resolve. She promised him she would do everything in her power to recover what was stolen and bring the culprits to justice. As she left the bakery, Angela noticed a familiar figure leaning against a patrol car across the street. Harper. He was watching her, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She crossed the street, her steps measured. "Harper," she said, stopping a few feet away. "What brings you here?" He shrugged, his posture casual. "Heard you were out playing detective. Thought I'd see how the new chief handles the streets." Angela ignored the jab. I'm doing my job. Maybe you should try it." His smirk returned. "Oh, I'm doing my job, Chief. Just differently than you." Angela took a step closer, her voice low but firm. "I'm not here to fight you, Harper, but make no mistake, I will hold you accountable. You can either be part of the solution or part of the problem. The choice is yours." Harper's smirk faded, replaced by a guarded expression. For a moment, it seemed as though he might say something, but instead, he turned and walked away, leaving Angela standing in the middle of the street. That evening, back at the precinct, Angela reviewed the day's findings. She had a clearer picture of the thefts now, but the bigger challenge loomed large: building trust within her department and the community. Harper's resistance was a symptom of a deeper issue, one that would take time and effort to overcome. Angela leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling as the weight of her role settled over her. She had chosen this path knowing it wouldn't be easy, but moments like these tested her resolve. Yet, even in the face of resistance, Angela felt a spark of determination. She had faced adversity before, and she would face it again. Ashton needed change, and she was here to deliver it, no matter how long it took. Cracks beneath the surface. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Angela's days were filled with meetings, crime scene visits, and long hours combing through the precinct's outdated procedures. She was relentless in her mission to reform the department, setting clear expectations and demanding accountability from every officer. Despite her efforts, she could feel the weight of resistance pressing against her, a silent but ever-present force, led by none other than Officer Harper. Harper's defiance was no longer confined to snide remarks and passive aggression. He had taken to rallying like-minded officers, creating an undercurrent of dissent within the department. Angela wasn't blind to their whispers, the way conversations hushed when she entered the room, or the sidelong glances exchanged in her presence. She had seen it all before. This was how resistance festered, thriving on fear and misinformation. Angela's breaking point came during a routine precinct-wide review meeting. She had called the session to address the department's progress on solving the theft cases, which had become a growing concern in the community. The briefing room was packed, every seat filled with officers looking at her expectantly or skeptically. Angela began with a summary of the case updates, outlining the next steps and emphasizing the importance of community engagement. As she spoke, Harper leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed and a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Chief," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her explanation, "I couldn't help but notice you've been spending a lot of time talking to civilians. You sure you're not running for mayor instead of running a department?" A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. Angela paused, her expression calm, but her eyes steely. "Officer Harper," she said, her tone firm, "community engagement is a key part of effective policing. If you'd like to discuss alternate strategies, I'd be happy to hear them after this meeting." Harper shrugged, his smirk widening. "I'm just saying, maybe if we spent less time shaking hands and more time actually enforcing the law, we'd be getting somewhere." Angela set down the report she was holding and took a step closer to the table. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice low but commanding. "This department serves the people of Ashton. Every action we take should reflect that responsibility. If you have a problem with that, Officer Harper, I suggest you take a long, hard look at why you wear that badge." The room remained silent as Angela's words hung in the air. Harper's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something she couldn't quite place: resentment, perhaps, or the beginnings of doubt. He didn't respond, and Angela took that as a small victory. That night, Angela stayed late at the precinct, the quiet hum of the building a stark contrast to the day's tension. She sat at her desk, poring over case files and personnel records, searching for a way to bridge the divide within her team. Her mind was heavy with questions. How could she win over officers who saw her as an outsider? How could she confront the entrenched biases that had shaped the department for decades? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She looked up to see Officer Ruse, one of the younger members of the team, standing hesitantly in the doorway. "Chief," Ruse said, stepping inside. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," Angela replied, setting her pen down. "What's on your mind?" Ruse hesitated, glancing down at his hands. "It's about Harper," he said finally. "And some of the others." Angela's brow furrowed. "Go on." Ruse took a deep breath. "I've heard them talking. They don't think you're here to stay. They think if they push hard enough, you'll leave." Angela's jaw tightened. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still a blow. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you think?" Ruse looked her in the eye, his expression earnest. "I think we need you here, Chief. This place has been stuck in the past for too long. But Harper, he's got influence. A lot of the older officers listen to him." Angela nodded, her mind racing. Harper wasn't just a nuisance. He was a force holding the department back, and his influence extended further than she'd anticipated. "Thank you for telling me, Ruse," she said. "It means a lot to know I have your support." Ruse nodded, a small but genuine smile crossing his face. "I'm not the only one, Chief. There are others who want to see things change. We're not as loud as Harper." Angela's lips curved into a faint smile. "Sometimes it's the quiet voices that make the biggest difference." The next morning, Angela called an emergency meeting with the department's leadership team. She outlined her concerns about the internal resistance, emphasizing the need for unity and a shared commitment to progress. "This department cannot function if we're divided," she said, her voice steady. "We need to rebuild trust, within our team and with the community. That starts here, with all of us." The response was mixed. Some nodded in agreement, their expressions resolute, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Angela knew she couldn't change hearts and minds overnight, but she was determined to plant the seeds of change. After the meeting, Angela returned to her office to find a small envelope sitting on her desk. She opened it cautiously, her heart sinking as she read the note inside. "You don't belong here. Leave while you still can." Angela's hand tightened around the paper, her resolve hardening. She wasn't afraid of threats. She had faced worse. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the department, the town, and the future she was fighting for. Angela knew one thing for certain. The battle was far from over, but she was ready to face it head-on. The cracks in the department's foundation were becoming visible, and she intended to rebuild it from the ground up, even if it meant confronting every demon Ashton had to offer. Shadows of resistance. Angela Carter sat in her office, staring at the ominous note that had appeared on her desk. The words, hastily scrawled and dripping with malice, were a stark reminder of the battle she was waging, not just against crime, but against the very culture of the department she was supposed to lead. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her mind. Was she fighting a losing battle? Could she really dismantle the walls of prejudice and complacency that had stood for decades? But Angela wasn't one to be intimidated. She placed the note in an evidence bag, her mind already working through how to address the situation. Whoever had left the note wanted her to feel unwelcome, to make her question her resolve. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The next day, Angela decided to address the note with her senior officers during a scheduled meeting. She placed the evidence bag on the table in front of her, its contents visible to everyone in the room. "This was left on my desk yesterday," Angela began, her voice calm but firm. "I don't know who put it there, but I want to make one thing very clear. Threats like this will not be tolerated in this department." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Angela scanned the faces around the table, noting the mixture of shock, discomfort, and, in some cases, indifference. Harper, seated near the end of the table, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "This department has a choice to make," Angela continued. "We can either move forward together, building a culture of respect and accountability, or we can let fear and division tear us apart. But understand this, I am not leaving. I am here to stay, and I will see this department transformed." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Officer Ruiz, sitting closer to Angela, cleared his throat. "Chief, I just want to say that I stand with you. Whoever did this doesn't represent the majority of us." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Though Angela noticed a few officers remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Harper, as always, said nothing, his gaze fixed on the evidence bag. Later that afternoon, Angela decided to dig deeper into the theft cases that had been plaguing the town. She knew that solving these crimes was essential, not just for the victims, but to prove her capability as a leader. If she could deliver results, it would help to chip away at the skepticism surrounding her. She spent hours combing through reports, piecing together patterns that others had overlooked. The thefts weren't random, she realized. They followed a clear progression, targeting businesses that had recently upgraded their security systems. It was as if the thieves were testing their capabilities, probing for weaknesses. Angela called Ruiz into her office, sharing her findings. Together, they devised a plan to set up surveillance at the most likely next target, a hardware store on the edge of town. That night, Angela and a small team, including Ruiz, staked out the store. The hours ticked by intense silence, the team hidden in unmarked vehicles around the property. Angela felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. If this plan failed, it would only give Harper and his allies more ammunition against her. Shortly after midnight, a shadowy figure appeared near the back entrance of the store. Angela's heart quickened as she watched the figure attempt to disable the security system. She signaled to her team, and within moments, they moved in, surrounding the suspect before they had a chance to escape. The suspect, a wiry man in his mid-30s, was taken into custody without incident. Angela's team found stolen goods in the trunk of his car, linking him to several of the recent thefts. It was a significant breakthrough, and Angela felt a surge of relief as they returned to the precinct. As the suspect was booked and the stolen items logged as evidence, Angela noticed Harper lingering near the booking area, his expression guarded. "Got something to say, Harper?" Angela asked, her tone neutral but challenging. He shrugged, his smirk faint. "Looks like you got lucky tonight, Chief." Angela took a step closer, her gaze steady. "This wasn't luck, Harper. This was hard work and teamwork. Two things I expect from every officer in this department." Harper's smirk faltered for a moment before he turned and walked away, leaving Angela standing in the fluorescent-lit hallway. She knew she hadn't won him over, not yet, but tonight had been a step in the right direction, a small victory in a much larger war. Later, as Angela sat alone in her office, reviewing the night's reports, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. The cracks in the department's resistance were beginning to show. Ruiz's loyalty, the successful sting operation, and even the hesitant murmur of support in the meeting earlier, all were signs that change was possible. But Angela also knew that Harper wasn't done. His silence during the meeting, his dismissive comment after the arrest, they were warnings. He was waiting for his moment, and Angela had no doubt he would take it as soon as it came. She closed her eyes, the weight of her mission pressing against her chest. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but Angela Carter wasn't one to back down. Ashton needed her, and she wasn't going anywhere. The turning point. The precinct was unusually quiet the morning after Angela's team apprehended the theft suspect. The air hummed with an unspoken acknowledgement of the chief's growing influence. Angela sat at her desk, poring over the final case files, ensuring all the pieces fit together. The arrest had been a victory, but she knew it was just one battle in the larger war for trust and change within her department. Her focus was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Officer Ruiz, holding a folder and wearing a nervous expression. "Chief," he began, stepping into the room. "There's something you need to see." Angela gestured for him to sit, her attention now fully on him. Ruiz placed the folder on her desk, flipping it open to reveal surveillance images and detailed logs. "These are from the past few months," he explained. "I've been keeping tabs on some suspicious activity within the department. Harper and a few others. They've been meeting off-duty in places where they think no one's watching." Angela's stomach tightened. What kind of activity? Ruiz hesitated, then pointed to a specific log entry. "There's evidence that Harper has been working with a few locals tied to the theft ring. He's been feeding them information, likely about patrol schedules and security vulnerabilities. He's not just resisting you, Chief. He's actively undermining this department." Angela leaned back in her chair, processing the information. The pieces began falling into place. Harper's disdain, his resistance to her leadership, and his dismissive attitude toward the theft cases. It wasn't just personal animosity, it was self-preservation. "Good work, Ruiz," Angela said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "This is exactly what we needed." Ruiz nodded, his expression serious. "What's the plan?" Angela's mind raced. This was her opportunity to not only expose Harper's corruption, but to set a clear example for the rest of the department. She needed to act swiftly and decisively. That afternoon, Angela called an emergency meeting with the precinct's leadership team. The officers filed into the conference room, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Harper was among them, his smirk firmly in place as he took a seat near the back. Angela stood at the front of the room, her presence commanding as she addressed the group. "I called this meeting because I've uncovered information that directly affects the integrity of this department," she began. "As officers of the law, our duty is to uphold justice and serve our community. But when that trust is broken, we must take action." She turned to Ruiz, who stepped forward and placed the folder of evidence on the table. Angela opened it, revealing the surveillance images and logs to the room. "These documents and images show a clear pattern of misconduct," she said. "Certain individuals within this department have been colluding with criminal elements to undermine our operations." The room erupted in murmurs, officers exchanging shocked and suspicious glances. Harper's smirk wavered, his posture stiffening as Angela's gaze settled on him. "Officer Harper," Angela said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Harper leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of defiance and feigned innocence. "You've got nothing on me, Carter," he said, his tone dismissive. "This is just a witch hunt." Angela's jaw tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she motioned to Ruiz, who played a recording from the surveillance logs. Harper's voice filled the room, his words unmistakable as he discussed patrol schedules and security details with a known associate of the theft ring. The murmurs grew louder, disbelief and anger rippling through the room. Harper's face turned pale, the arrogance draining from his expression as the evidence mounted against him. "This is what betrayal looks like," Angela said, her voice steady and resolute. "Harper's actions have put this department's reputation and the safety of this community at risk. Effective immediately, Officer Harper is suspended without pay pending a full investigation. Internal Affairs has been notified and will be conducting a thorough review." Harper shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "You think you can just waltz in here and take me down?" He spat. "You don't belong here, Carter. This is my town." Angela took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "No, Harper, this is Ashton's town, and I will do everything in my power to make sure it's a town where justice and integrity come first." Harper glared at her, his fists clenched, but he didn't say another word. Two officers escorted him out of the room, his protests fading as the door closed behind him. The aftermath of Harper's suspension sent shockwaves through the department. Angela knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild trust, but the removal of such a toxic influence was a critical step. She spent the following days meeting with officers individually, listening to their concerns and reaffirming her commitment to change. Slowly, the atmosphere in the precinct began to shift. Officers who had been hesitant to support Angela started to see the value of her leadership. Ruiz, now a trusted ally, worked alongside her to implement new training programs and protocols aimed at fostering accountability and collaboration. One evening, as Angela prepared to leave the precinct, she noticed a small envelope on her desk. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she opened it, she found a handwritten note. Not a threat, but a message of gratitude. "Chief Carter, thank you for standing up for what's right. Ashton needs you. We're with you." Angela's eyes softened as she read the words, a small but powerful reminder that her fight wasn't in vain. Change was never easy, but it was worth every battle, every sleepless night, every difficult conversation. As she stepped outside, the cool evening air filled her lungs. The town of Ashton spread out before her, its streets quiet but alive with possibility. Angela Carter had come back to her hometown to face its demons, and she wasn't leaving until the job was done.